Okay, we're back from a break at 3 o'clock. Let's take up item 9A, timed item for 2:30. Discussion and possible action, including approval of the joint presentation on the retirement system actuarial study and adoption of the retirement system's contribution rate. To the retirement executive director, I guess it is.
Actually, Tim Knutson, interim retirement administrator.
Okay.
In just a minute, I'll be introducing Harold Loeb, who was an actuary with Buck Consultants that actually prepared the actuarial report. But before Harold goes over the report, I just want to give you a little history on an issue that he's going to be presenting, which is now part of the report and hasn't been before. And it deals with a couple of funding agreements that were reached between the county and the retirement system in previous years. In 1992-93, the then CAO, Mike Scannell, came to the retirement board, and there was a problem balancing the budget, and he requested that the Board of Retirement allow the county to increase the amortization of the then existing unfunded liability from the 15-year amortization period that was in effect at the time in 1992-93. He requested that that be increased to 25 years. And the retirement board agreed to that at the time. And we operated that under that agreement for a long time. Then in 2002, well, actually a little bit further, 1996, there was another funding agreement when the county issued the 1996 pension obligation bonds. At that time, there was a $48 million unfunded liability. The pension bonds were issued at $30 million, leaving an $18 million unfunded liability. And the agreement at that time was, during the life of the bonds, the county would not pay anything on that existing $18 million unfunded liability, knowing that it would grow. Later, in December of 2002, the market was favorable and the county issued an additional pension obligation bonds, partially, I hate to use this term, but partially synthetically refunding some of the 1996 bonds. We borrowed money in 2002, put it into an escrow fund, and that escrow fund generates revenue, interest, and dividends, that kind of thing, and makes the payments on about half of the then existing 1996 bonds. We had about $30 million left on the 96 million bonds. We weren't able to call the bonds. Pension obligation bonds are not callable because of IRS regulations. So we did this refunding where we set the money aside in an escrow fund. The trustee has been paying those bonds every year since 2002 when we entered that transaction. And we have been making the payment on the remaining 1996 pension obligation bonds every year when we pay our 2002 pension obligation bonds. And the following year, 2008-9 will be the last year that we're making a payment on the 1996 pension obligation bonds. But the funding agreement that was reached in December of 2002 was that during the life of the 2002 pension obligation bonds, the county would not be required to make a payment on the unfunded liability as long as the funded ratio of the retirement system was 90% or above. And basically what we were doing is always aiming to have the system be funded at 90%. And we didn't really realize at the time and make the connection between the two, but the 2002 funding agreement really conflicted with the 1992-93 funding agreement, because in 92-93 the board or the county said we will fully pay off the unfunded liability at the end of 25 years. And the 2002 kind of conflicted with that, as I said a moment ago. So we are making a recommendation in this actuarial report that we start to phase out this funding agreement. We start to do it over the next 10-year period. And so that when we get to the end of the original 25-year amortization period that we granted in 92-93, we will be funded at 100% instead of 90%. And that is going to be covered in Harold's presentation on the report, and then we can discuss it when we get through with that presentation.
Please, proceed.
Harold?
Thank you. Do you have a copy of the report in front of you? I'd like to start on page 19, if you will. And look at the table at the bottom of the page. The rates in effect for the plan year beginning in July of 2006 represents that first line. Current rates, 10.1%, applied to the payroll at that time produced a $5.8 million contribution obligation. Applying that same rate to the July 1, 2007 payroll produces a almost $6.6 million contribution. The number of active employees at the county increased by over 6%, and the average pay increased by about 7.5%. So there was a 14.3% increase in the total pay, which represents that increase. When we look at the current population and redo the valuation, we come up with line 3. Again, funding to the 90% target, a funding payroll rate of 10.35%. So not much of a difference there between the prior year. If the objective is to move to 100% funding over the next 10 years by increasing the target by 1% each year, we wind up with the numbers on line 4, 10.98% or $7.2 million. If we were to amortize towards 100% on a level basis between now and 10 years from now, that contribution obligation would be 16.66%, or about $11 million. So there is a significant unfunded liability of about $40 million. And fortunately, because of the way that we value the assets for funding purposes, we use a smoothing technique where we phase in differences between the assumed rate of return and the actual rate of return over a 5-year period so as to eliminate a lot of volatility in the asset value